Hi, good morning. This is Pat Sharp. I'm the clinic director at Neuroeducation, and I want to talk briefly this morning with you about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and what it is really. Um, so, typically, the usual definitions that you hear are that there's, three types: the kind that's predominantly space cadet, inattentive, and then the second kind is the one that's predominantly the fast motor, la la la, can't shut his mouth, can't stop his legs, can't, he's impulsive, he's on the go all the time, or she is. And then, of course, the third is the combination of those. So the typical kind of description that you get, which is kind of useless because it doesn't really talk about the impact that this child has on his family, his school, his world around him. Um, those are pretty common things that almost everybody would tell you, but a more descriptive thing is this business about what it's like to live with a child like this. And this is typically the story we get from parents coming in to see us for diagnosis or possible diagnosis, and that is that almost every single morning is this screaming match just to get out the door. And it's, I just, every morning mom gets up and she prays that it's going to be a better morning, but sometimes it is without any warning, and sometimes it's more likely than not. And the homework thing, it takes hours and hours for this little second grade kid to get done, which should literally take 20 minutes, but he just can't get started on it, or he can't keep going on it unless mom is sitting right next to him to do it. And then if I do sit next to him and try to help him, he yells at me. He's upset with me. Um, it's just kind of a nightmare. And then because he doesn't tend to finish anything, dad begins to think he doesn't care, and or mom begins to think he doesn't care. And consequences like punishments or having screen time taken away, um, they just don't seem to work. I mean, you'll give him the punishment and he'll turn right around, do the same thing you just did that you just had the consequences for. And that's just so frustrating for parents. And then the final piece that we hear a lot in clinic here is that they just get so overwhelmed. The slightest thing, way overreaction to what's going on. Now, here's some interesting kind of consensus in neuroscientific findings in the last decades, and more so in the last decade. And that is, there's a lot of neurological hardware data now that's telling us that there's an area of the brain that is very, very highly involved. It's not the only culprit in the disorder, but it plays a big part. And that's the front end of the right frontal lobes in the brain. So that's like under your forehead on the right hand side. And MRI scans that are magnetic resonance imaging, they are showing, that it's actually neuroanatomically smaller over there in kiddos diagnosed and adults diagnosed with ADHD. Now, functional MRIs are the same thing, only now instead of just showing the map of like the structure of what's there, it's showing the traffic of like, so what's working. And that's also, obviously, for the same reason, showing some abnormality in that same anterior frontal lobe area. PET scans, positron emission topography scans, are showing that there's less glucose metabolism going on up there in the frontal lobes. And glucose is like the gasoline for the brain. It's what gets it to run, to do its thing. So there's less of that in the ADHD population. And then finally, EEG studies, which show electrical activity. There's underarousal in the frontal lobes as well. So there's a lot of consensus that the frontal lobes have something to do with this. So what do the frontal lobes do? Oh, I'll talk about that in a sec. The other piece that we're getting a lot more research on now recently is identical twin studies. And that's showing that there's a greater than 75% risk for ADHD in identical twins, which means their brains are similar. Now, what does the frontal lobes do, especially the right frontal lobes? Well, it's totally involved in this ability to put on the brakes or inhibit or get started. It's kind of like the CEO, the conductor of your behaviors of what you decide to do or not do. So you without that conductor sort of being in charge, you're kind of like this. You're just like loose on the wild. You're just you're on the go. Russell Barkley, who's a well-known expert in ADHD treatment, talks about their inability to inhibit the present with any kind of an eye toward the future. They don't see the future. They don't get that part. And here's a little cartoon that I think just really exemplifies this. I borrowed this from a colleague. This just really, and I quote him at the end. This is what Jack sees. It's like, wow, look at this. This is totally cool. This is so amazing. I don't want to do anything else. I can't stop doing this. I got a fish. This is great. But in reality, this is what everybody else sees, which is, you better heads up. Something's coming up here that you need to know about. Anyways, so to sum it up, executive functioning has a lot to do with the brakes on behavior that you internally have. And granted, all normal parents have to be the brakes for their 2 and 3-year-olds because neurodevelopmentally, they haven't developed that area of their brain very well yet. But that makes sense. But even in the ADHD population, you're going to see excessive inability to do any kind of braking because by 2 and 3 years of age, kids are able to do some braking, not a whole lot, but some, but you don't even see that. And then, of course, it has that ability, to shift, to have you stop doing one thing and start doing another thing. Oh, here's a big one, the whole development of what's called self-talk. And you see that normally in 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds where they will talk right out loud, kind of a monologue of what they're doing while they're doing it. And that's normal. That's normal development. And then that gets internalized by around 5 or 6 or 7. It doesn't fall on your birth date. It's just kind of a gradual development. We still do it. You and I do it as adults all the time, but it's internalized now. We kind of self-talk internally. But you don't see that self-talk very often in the ADHD population when they were little guys, nor do they have it when they get older. So that turns out to be a really good tool to try and teach them how to do in treatment, depending on their level of ability and all. So working memory is also a big area, and that's the ability to hold on to something in your mind while you're working on it and then add one other tidbit to it. So it might be like if you're trying to do a long division problem and you've got the first step, the number, how many of those would fit into the first number under the division sign, and then you have to hold on to that number, write it down, and then shift, and then come up with, okay, now what do I do next? And they get stuck on any kind of structural, procedural stuff like that because their working memories are not very good. And we have excellent tests to look at that, by the way, in children and adults to see, is that a problem? Initiation is that ability to get started. And then foresight and hindsight, those two are hugely important and missing in poor executive functioning. Foresight is that ability to plan ahead to, if I do this, then what'll happen? And hindsight is the kind of the rear view mirror, like, ooh, I tried that before. I climbed up on the roof and I got in big trouble for that. And I'm going to, that doesn't stick, so I'm going to climb up on the roof again, or whatever the behavior is. And then this is a biggie too, this ability to separate your emotion from facts. They tend to get their emotion and their facts just all mixed up together. And sometimes it's real heavy on the facts, and sometimes it's just really heavy on the emotion, and you never know which one they're in. And vice versa, the opposite of that, of course, is adding emotion to facts. So there's either all one or the other. It's black or white. And as a parent, you're going, who is this kid? Okay, so just in summary, ADHD does not go away as you get older. The true diagnosis of it persists through the lifetime. And it doesn't get worse, it's just that the conditions of life get more demanding. And as you grow older and you're supposed to be making choices for yourself, you don't have the ability to do all those braking functions and monitoring and in stopping your impulses and all that. So it becomes more of a problem in adulthood, and it obviously doesn't bode really well for marriages because it's a tough person to live with who's got this, who doesn't even appreciate that there's something goofy going on. Anyways, I've enjoyed sharing this bit of information with you. I hope you learned a little something, and be sure to watch the next one. The next one I'm going to talk about. So what do we do about it? How do we treat it? How do we help make it better? And I want to give, of course, many thanks for the ideas in this presentation that I got from Martin Kuchner, a wonderful doctor who, not in our area, but not in the Spokane area, but very knowledgeable about ADHD. Thanks. Bye.